Hello and welcome to Business Today Television. I'm Siddharth Zarabi and you're watching Easynomics. CareEdge Ratings has reported stable credit ratings for corporate India in the first half of the financial year ending September. They've upgraded 217 entities and downgraded 130 during this period, resulting in a credit ratio of 1:1.67. This aligns with the expectations, though it slightly surpasses the 10-year average of 1.54. Joining us today as our guest to decode this report titled Corporate India on a Steady Course Amid Challenges is Sachin Gupta, the Chief Rating Officer of CareEdge Ratings. Sachin, welcome to the show. Your release says, despite facing global challenges, India's economy has exhibited resilience and remains steady. Tell us about the latest measurement and why is it significant?
Yeah. So, this is an exercise that we do every 6 months, and we look at the upgrades and downgrades, as you mentioned, in the preceding 6-month period. So this study that we've done is for April 23 to September 23. And as you rightly said, the ratio is 1.67. Now, there are two things here. One is that the ratio has moderated from the earlier periods where it was 2.7 and 3.7, as you can see. The key reason why it is moderated is because the earlier times the ratio was also high because it was on an immediately succeeding to the COVID downturn. So during COVID, there were a lot of rating actions which were downward. And then we kind of, in a way, corrected them as the companies started improving their profitability and, that the ratio kind of improved. In the immediately preceding period that we're talking about right now at 1.67, I think it gains importance from the fact that globally, there is a fair bit of stress that we can see. We have challenges which are there in, Europe and US, both in the financial system and otherwise in their economy, and even in China. So in that backdrop, to have a ratio of 1.67 basically means that we are upgrading more entities than downgrading them, despite the challenges that they're facing. Second point here is that which are the companies that we are downgrading, because we're still downgrading a lot of companies. So the ones that we're downgrading are actually the companies which have more export linkages, especially in the sectors like pharma, in textiles, in chemicals, which are more export-oriented sectors and more dependent on the commodity prices which may have gone up. So that's the reason. So despite global challenges, we believe that the credit performance of the corporate India continues to be stable and it will remain like that going forward.
When you say it will remain like that going forward, how long a view are you taking?
So we are, there are obviously issues which can crop up like geopolitical or crude oil prices or, monsoon. So keeping those aside for the moment, which is kind of a little unpredictable things. Apart from that, we believe that the corporate India is on a strong footing. 2-3 things here. One is that the leverage, the debt to equity ratio for the corporate India has been kind of coming down. So which allows them more headroom, even if there is some weakness in some period. So therefore, the credit strength kind of derives, credit quality derives strength from there. Second point is that the most of the companies that we're looking at, especially the ones which are dependent on the domestic demand, they continue to do well because, our GDP growth is still expected to be at about 6.5% for the current year. And it will kind of continue in the future as well, in that ballpark. So keeping those things in mind, we are fairly confident that the corporate India's credit quality will remain stable.
What were the key drivers for the upgrades that you have done?
So, upgrades, if you see, I would like to split across the segments, right? So if we look at it like 3 segments, one is manufacturing, second is BFSI, and the third is BFSI meaning banking and financial services. And third is the infrastructure sector. And each of the 3 would have, different drivers for the upgrades. So if you see the BFSI sector, that actually has had the best credit ratio in the current period of nearly 4. And there the key driver has been the strong performance on the asset quality. So asset quality essentially in terms of, how much of their loans have turned bad is what we really measure by, asset quality measured by ratios like, net NPAs or gross NPAs. Now there, if you see the asset quality of both banks and NBFCs is actually at one of the best levels that we have seen in the foreseeable past. And there, the reasons for that is that, during the COVID times, there was uh, maybe tightening of the credit standards, and the banks and the financial institutions, they actually lent with very superior or tight credit standards, and we have not really seen delinquencies coming up there. So that is, I would say, the primary reason. The second reason on the BFSI is also because they've got a lot of equity infusion. The capitalization has happened both for banks and NBFCs, which again provides the credit strength. So this is on the BFSI. On the infrastructure sector, if you see, there, largely the upgrades have been driven by the continued completion of projects. Typically, the credit rating of a project gets improves when the project gets completed. So during construction phase, it may have a rating, but once it's completed, the cash flows start coming in, then the ratings improve. So that has been the I would say the big driver for them. On the manufacturing side, there it is, while the ratio for the manufacturing is not very high, the credit ratio there is about 1.3 or so. So it's kind of the weakest amongst all three. And there it's a mix. The upgrades have happened because of strong domestic demand, as I mentioned before. But the downgrades have also happened because of the companies which are more outwardly focused, or they are dependent on imports, which kind of got repriced, or they were dependent on exports, wherein the demand fell, especially in Europe and other developed economies. So it's a mixed bag there in the manufacturing and the services. But overall, as I said, both in BFSI and infra, it continues to remain strong. On manufacturing, it kind of is more moderated.
On a broader point, and not necessarily to do with your half-yearly reviews, do you think that these numbers and the previous numbers that you have looked into point towards maturation of our infrastructure segment, particularly transport infrastructure, given the massive amounts of development that have happened, faster execution, better policy and regulation? Do you think that's a fair question to ask?
So, when you say maturation, you mean that maybe this is the peaking out of the credit quality?
What I really meant was that the negatives are
Sector has
behind.
matured. Yeah,
It has matured. Yeah.
No, you're right. And I think that would be most true for the infrastructure sector, because over the last, I would say, 10 years or so, there have been structural changes that have happened in the infrastructure, whether it is, say, renewable energy or, say, transportation, as you mentioned. There is inherently structural changes that have happened, whether it is, more, I would say, bidding out of larger number of projects, more active involvement of the government agencies in kind of taking whenever the risks kind of come in, they've kind of actively engaged with the developers in solving them, and not really left them to their own devices. That has been kind of a very central thing. Also, specifically on transportation, I would say the hybrid annuity model, which kind of was introduced 7-8 years back, that has also kind of played out very well. Now we are seeing a lot of those projects getting commissioned, and strong cash flows coming in. Similarly, on the renewable side within the infra, that again has been strong support from the government to sponsor more and more projects, do sectoral kind of reforms, which essentially allows the corporates to have a more stabilized risk on them. Otherwise, earlier there was a lot of concern on the infrastructure sector. The banks were not really touching them because of the high level of defaults, and they're very high value, each project being 1,000 crore, 2,000 crore. So those kind of things, if you notice, last 5-6 years we've not seen. So there is clearly a structural.
That was the reason I asked you, because 10 years back we saw the aftermath, the negative aftermath of the infrastructure binge that happened, and in some ways the entire ecosystem was perhaps not fully evolved, including financing, project risk, execution, government approvals, and you I cut you off when you were about to mention about the structural changes. Please complete that point.
Yeah. So a lot of structural changes have happened, and if I were to take an example, I was talking to you about hybrid annuity model, for building roads, and this is the model. It has been successful simply because there is a better risk sharing amongst three stakeholders. In any infrastructure project, there are three key stakeholders. One is the government, second is the developer, and third is the financial institutions. In the past, when we saw the risk sharing was not okay, either generally that was too much loaded on the developer, and then if the developer can't do it, he would just leave the project, and then the entire thing will fall on the financial institution. Now, what has happened is two things. One, or rather, I would say three things. A, the government is ready to take more responsibility and ownership for the success of the project. That is one. That we've seen in both renewable and roads. Second, the developers themselves, I think they are not going unbridled, bidding very, very aggressively, which led to, the projects going down, in more often than not, as we were seeing earlier. So there has been a sense prevailing with them. And thirdly, and not, and equally importantly, the financial institution, their lending for infrastructure projects is also with a lot more, I would say, eyes open and factoring in the risk and, approving projects which have good, which are structurally good, and not lending to projects which may have challenges. So I think at all three levels, for the key stakeholder, there has been a decided improvement, and that is what we are seeing leading to overall improvement on the credit profile there.
And Sachin, this assumes even greater importance given the fact that the government has a massive infrastructure investment pipeline plan. We saw that big number in that budget, and despite politics, it is very clear that the government will continue to invest in a very big way as far as infrastructure is concerned.
Right, and it's I would just like to make a little nuanced point here. And all that you're saying is right. What happened 10 years back was most of our infrastructure players, they were actually in very poor shape. They, the balance sheets were, dislocated. They did not really have the appetite to bid for new projects or build any infrastructure. Over the last 10 years, what we've seen is because of a little bit of I would say, a hand-holding by the government, the new crop of infrastructure players now have the balance sheets which allows them to bid for larger projects and complete them in a timely manner. And that, I think, is very, very essential, because as the government is on its path, you're right, government is on its path of building infrastructure and it's a key focus area. But then we also need to have contractors and developers who will be able to deliver in time. And that is where I would say the last 10 years story is very, very critical. Because now there is more and more confidence with the developers, with the financial institutions, and with the government that whatever projects are bid out will be completed largely within time.
Absolutely, and we've seen how India has toyed with various models, and like you said, the hybrid annuity model clearly working in the favor of everybody involved. Let's turn our attention to the challenges, including, more importantly, the global challenges that we are seeing. How do you read your findings and explain that to a larger audience? What do these challenges really mean?
So, what we have seen in terms of the downgrades, there are some of the trends that we can see here. One, we are seeing that the companies which are largely dependent on export revenues, and that too from limited number of geographies, and where they don't have a pricing power, they have been impacted, because in some of the economies, especially in 22-23, there was what they call destocking, because everyone expected the demand to continue as it would. Immediately succeeding the COVID times, there was a lot of consumption which happened in Europe and US, and a lot of then supply chains were stocked with a lot of material. And then in 22-23 was the time when they had to be destocked. And because of that, a lot of Indian players who were on the export market or who were dependent on exports could not really export those commodities because no one wanted them in Europe and US. So that is one thing that we have seen. Is the reason why the downgrades have happened. Secondly, there are also segments which have gotten impacted because of the crude price volatility and the chemicals which are on the crude derivative side. There also there have been cases where the companies have had significant impact on their profitability. Third thing I would say, and this is not so much sectoral, but what we are seeing is that the smaller entities, and the entities which are even to start with are in the sub-investment grade. When I say sub-investment, I mean the ratings which are either double B or below, double B, single B, which are generally entities which have high risk to start with, we have seen more downgrades coming in that segment. So these are entities which are inherently, I would say, weak to start with, and those companies have been, which are more exposed, have been subjected to downgrades. Whereas the companies which are larger, which have pricing power, they are able to maybe pass down their cost increases, etc., to their intermediate companies. There we have seen that the downgrades have not been so many. So that, I would say, in a nutshell, are the reasons, or the challenges that the companies have faced.
What does all of this mean for the health, the continuing health of the banking sector?
So that's a very interesting thing you've asked, Siddharth. The banking sector, as I was alluding to at the beginning, is actually right now maybe looking at its best asset quality, as we have seen in many years. And asset quality, as I said, is the numbers like net NPA. They are lower than 1%, or I think 1% or so across the banking sector. And for private sector banks, it's even lower. The fact is that what it would mean is that especially for the PSU banks, because we saw for a long time PSU banks, because they had their asset quality issues earlier, and they took some years to get the equity infused from the government of India, and then they cleaned up their books. But now we are seeing that in a way it's behind them for most of them, and that would mean that they will have more appetite to lend. While we are not seeing too much of a credit growth on the industry side yet, it is largely on the retail side. But still, we believe that with the the banks, especially the PSU banks, having their asset quality issues behind, and with more confidence in them to lend, we can see that that they can drive the growth of the investment that we expect the private sector to start. So that is one. Secondly, if I look at the NBFCs, now NBFCs had again their challenging years in 2017 and 18. Many of them faced serious issues, especially the ones which were exposed to real estate builders, etc. But now, if you see, we've actually have a new crop of NBFCs which are largely focusing on the retail segment, along with the fintech, use of technology and all that. So that again is showing reasonably strong asset quality. Now there, while as of now we're seeing good asset quality, but maybe they will take some beating as we go ahead. But overall, the asset quality, even on the NBFCs, continues to be reasonably strong. We had concerns during the COVID times that they will have a lot of pressure. There were schemes like restructuring and moratorium, etc., that were given, and there was a concern that once all these things are taken away, there could be delinquencies, or the defaults could crop up. But we are not seeing that. So that again gives us confidence that our financial system overall, if I was to look, is possibly in the best shape. If I were to especially look at what happened in US, what we're also hearing is happening in China, our financial system is in a very strong space, both the public sector and the private sector.
Absolutely, and that's a very good point to summarize the situation for our viewers. Look at what is happening overseas. Viewers, look at China. Who could have imagined the news flow that we are seeing today out of China just 3 years back pre-COVID? But that's how the penny falls at times. And we've just heard from Sachin Gupta a detailed overview into the health of India Inc. Sachin Gupta, thank you very much for your time with us today. With that, viewers, it's a wrap on this episode of Easynomics. We'll be back with more. Until then, goodbye.
If you like the video, do like, comment, share and subscribe.